BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, KHIDI, a public institution under the Ministry of Health and Welfare of the Republic of Korea. Through its K-Blockbuster Global Expansion Program, KHIDI supports Korean biohealth companies entering major innovation hubs like the Boston BioCluster by providing office spaces in the Cambridge Innovation Center and many networking opportunities. Since 2022, KHIDI has supported 43 companies, resulting in FDA approvals, licensing deals, and the establishment of an emerging Korean ecosystem in the U.S. We're recording this episode live from K-Blockbuster Night, held in collaboration with Venture Café at CIC Cambridge, featuring 9 K-Blockbuster companies: Apollon, Hyuan USA, UN USA, Dong-A, Intech Scientific, C&R Research US, VS PharmTech, Protein A, and MEPSGen US.
You are listening to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast, recorded live on stage November 6th at Venture Café Cambridge at the Cambridge Innovation Center for KHIDI's K-Blockbuster Night. BioCentury would like to thank KHIDI, that's the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, for sponsoring the event. Now, here's your host, Josh Berlin.
Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Today we are coming to you live from the Venture Café Cambridge in the heart of one of the world's most important biotech hubs. My name is Josh Berlin and I lead business development for BioCentury. As many of you podcast listeners know, we have taken the podcast on the road for several live recordings this year, most recently in Shanghai last month at our 12th China Healthcare Summit. You may, of course, listen to the BioCentury This Week podcast and our sister podcast, The BioCentury Show, on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. This is the first time that BioCentury has recorded a podcast in the Biotech Hub of Boston, Cambridge. And it's really great, speaking on behalf of my colleague Simone, it's really great to be back in town and seeing so many great faces in the room. Before we get started, I did want to thank our friends at KHIDI, which is known as the Korea Health Industry Development Institute under Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare, for sponsoring this special edition of the podcast. Also, a special thanks to Venture Café at the Cambridge Innovation Center, where we are recording today's podcast during KHIDI's Blockbuster Night. For those who don't know KHIDI's Blockbuster Initiative, it's an expansion program that helps Korea life sciences companies to enter major innovation hubs like Boston, Cambridge. And we'll be talking a little bit today about that program. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. BioCentury has visited South Korea several times in the last couple of years. And as everyone knows, Asia deals right now are really hot in the industry. A lot of that deal flow is focused on China, but BioCentury is also seeing growing opportunities across what we call Asia's emerging arc of innovation, which includes South Korea, Singapore, Japan, Australia, and elsewhere. And we think Korea in particular represents an opportunity in addition to a growing biotech ecosystem with opportunities for Western biopharma companies and investors to potentially source innovation. We also think there's a lot of opportunities to accelerate drug development through Korea clinical trials and CDMO manufacturers. And in fact, BioCentury will be out in Korea in March for our 5th East-West Biopharma Summit. We'll be out there in Seoul. If anyone wants to join us and learn more, please check out the website at biocenturyeastwest.com. So with that brief intro, let's get started. We're going to split today's podcast into 2 mini panels. We're going to start with an industry session, followed by an investor session. We're going to start right now with the industry session. I first of all wanted to introduce my colleague, Simone Fishburne, BioCentury's VP and Editor-in-Chief, who of course needs no introduction to our podcast listeners. Also on this session, Simone and I are joined by Aram Hong, CEO of Korea medtech startup Apollon, which is part of the K-Blockbuster program here in Cambridge, and also Andy Whittle, who is global head of BD&L in the cardio-renal metabolic space for Boehringer Ingelheim. Andy's also based here in the Boston, Cambridge area. And as we're going to learn, I think Boehringer Ingelheim has been one of the more active Western biopharmas in Korea. So look forward to hearing Andy's take on that. Let's get started. So Simone, maybe we'll start with you. BioCentury recently issued, you and your team, a report about Asia deals. We got a lot of feedback about that. Transactions from the start of 2023 through mid-2025. Obviously a lot of discussion about China in there, but also I thought some interesting takeaways about Korea. One in particular that jumped out to me was, I believe it was Korea represented 12% of the total Asia deals, but 20% of the first-in-class partnerships. Maybe walk us through that report, sort of top level, and what your key takeaways were from that.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody. It's really fun to be here. I don't think people are going to argue with what an important hub this is. Certainly not people here are going to argue with that. So we did look at these deals, out-licensing deals from Asia. And so what this meant was these were Asia-based biotechs. Since, as you say, it was about a 30-month thing. It was from the beginning of 2023 through, I guess, the end of June this year. I think there were just shy of 200 deals. We were looking at Western biotechs and pharmas, MNCs, multinational corporations, that were licensing in these assets, right? There was a handful of M&A, but actually M&A was not a big part of this picture, which is something we might talk about. But the thing that struck me was 2/3 of the deals were for Western biotech licensees, right? And so I think generally when we think about deals with Asia and people on the ground, and we've got one here, it's mostly people think about getting farmers, and farmers have really been on the ground, and I know we're going to talk about that, but I think the degree to which Western biotechs are reaching out, creating partnerships in licensing assets is just extraordinary. And you're right that a lot were from China. So that was one of the take-homes. I think the other is the area of innovation. I think people tend to think that it's all about cancer. We are seeing a real rise in I&I, right? Immunology and inflammation, and certainly on the China front with obesity too. And so what we're learning is that, very, very fast innovation sort of catches fire in Asia. And now I'm going to lean into that a little bit more for Korea, because to your point, 20% of the first-in-class deals. And what we see is that there were obviously fewer deals from Korea or from Korean biotechs, but the proportion among those of first-in-class assets was really quite high, was much higher. And what that tells me, and I really am keen to discuss it with you guys, is, it sort of speaks to an appetite for risk, right? Going first in class, and we define that at BioCentury as you could be the first against a target, or you could be going against a target with a new modality or into a new indication. But basically, there's a very different risk profile for first in class. And while China is getting there, and I think people are moving away from thinking about it even just as fast followers, it seems like Korea has had that appetite sort of inbuilt for a while. So I'm going to stop here and see where you want to go with that.
No, that's great, Simone. So Andy, maybe we'll go to you next. There's been, I think, a few deals this year that were highlighted in the BioCentury report. GSK and Korea Able deal, which I think was 77 million up front. And there's a few others there that sort of struck my eye. But then, you guys just did a deal. The timing couldn't be better. We love having folks join the podcast who are hot off of a deal. And tell us a little bit, this was a deal with, ADC deal with a Korean company called Amed Bio. Tell us a little bit about how that happened and what you're seeing from Boehringer Ingelheim's perspective in terms of innovation and opportunities for partnerships in Korea.
Yeah, so maybe if I could, I'll set the context here, which is, we're not new to being very, very interested in the Korean innovation space. I mean, we've been in Korea for a long time, and I've been at the company since 2021, and I know it stems way before that we've had a physical presence in Asia for sure. And in my time here, we've really doubled down on having a boots-on-the-ground approach to Korea itself. June Han is someone who helped organize this event, and she's our sort of person right there, my eyes and ears for my global team in what's happening in Korea. I think I would sort of echo what you were saying about the risk willingness of the Korean biotech sector. And I think we've realized that for a while, because we also have, as a company, Boehringer does tend to partner a little bit earlier. We have a big research organization, and we're willing to step in and share some of that risk if the science is solid. And I think that's been a really obvious sort of meeting of concepts between the Korean approach and our approach, which is if you aim big, go bold, we want transformative, first-in-class medicines. It's a good place for us to find exciting, bold new ideas with that ambition to be first-in-class and to be transformative. And I think the deal you saw us make 2 weeks ago is a product of that.
And I'm going to jump in, okay, because, and we at BioCentury, I'm going to even use the word suffer from this, okay, because Boehringer does a lot of really interesting, really early stage deals. And maybe because you're private, we don't know about a lot of the stuff that you guys do, okay? This makes it hard for us. We would like to know. You have a presence there, but, you know, it's not necessarily broadcast. And, you know, we'll see these announcements about deals. We're like, wow, that is actually... And so we do notice, actually, this sort of appetite that you guys have for early stage things and for risk. So maybe you can talk us through a little bit. When you're out there, you're looking at this asset, how are you comparing that with what you could get outside of Korea? What is your process? Now I've got you in front of us, so I can ask you this.
Captive audience,
Captive audience, yeah.
We are real. I mean, I know a lot of companies say this, but I've been at the company for 4.5 years now, and
You're going to say you're the partner of choice?
No, I'm not going to say that. I say the idea that we put science first is the lived ethos of the company. So it really does come down to it being really good science. What do we find in Korea? Why do we keep going? Why have we been there for so long? Why are we still there? Why are we doubling down now with people like June and a colleague in Shanghai as well in some of these Asian arenas where we really want to be getting there first to these cool new ideas? It's because we see really high quality science coming out of biotechs, particularly in Korea as well. I mean, I've had interactions in the CRM space. You've seen a deal this week in the oncology space. We were interested in INR as well, in immunology and respiratory medicine. It's because the science is really high quality, but it's not just about this high quality science either. There's something about the interactions I've had with a lot of Korean biotechs, which is they've really thought about their readiness to partner and to mobilize and accelerate the development of the asset with a partner. So it's this added bonus of you walk into the initial conversations and yes, the data's great, yes, the ambition is high, but the company structure and the people that are behind the impetus there have really thought, before they even speak to me, they've really thought about what they want from a partnership, which often I go to companies all over the world and say, what do you want in the partnership? And they kind of...
Money, is there?
Well, yeah, but I want to get involved in the science. My teams want to get involved in the science. And what I want to know from them is like, what's your next challenge? What do you need help with? What's the next big barrier for you to overcome to get this into patients?
So I'm going to ask a question, and maybe, I'm sorry if I'm messing up.
No, go ahead.
So, you know, one of the things we talk about with China and the growth of the ecosystem there is that you've had, you know, returnees, sea turtles, they've gone back, they've worked in farmers, they've learned this, and so there's a maturation going on there. The Korean biotechs haven't really had that much exposure. So maybe you can talk about this as well. Like, where are they getting this sophistication from? What's behind it, and what's their training ground?
Oh, yeah. Before answering that, so I need to explain
who you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What we are doing, so we are developing non-invasive continuous glucose monitoring. So our mission is to remove the subcutaneous the needle from the existing CGM. So it's 2025. So the needles in the skin feels something wrong. It's natural. We are not the traditional, the pure biotech, so kind of the medical wearable. So this is a conversion, the fusion, life sciences, and precision engineering. Back to your question. In Korea, for several decades, the top students have gone into the medicine and pharma and biotech and precision engineering. So,
Aram, you know, we probably should have introduced to begin with that you are the founder and CEO of Apollon, but you're also, you've moved out to Cambridge. You're here, part of the K blockbuster program, which we were talking earlier, just one-to-one, about how you moved your family here and real big bet on your company here. So can you talk also about sort of how your background has allowed you to sort of set up shop here, and what the K Blockbuster program is all about, and how that's part of your strategy?
Oh, yeah. Getting the chance to be on this podcast is already the big benefit from the K Blockbuster program. So KHIDI, the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, the organization running the K Blockbuster program, has been hugely supportive for Korean startups trying to land in the greater Boston area. They provide free office space for 30 Korean companies.
And you're based here at the Innovation Center.
Yeah. So the reason why I moved to here last year, so our first market is U.S. CGM market, U.S. diabetes care market. So we needed to conduct a feasibility study for FDA clearance. Yeah. So that was the only reason why I moved to here. And we operate 2 sites in Seoul and in Boston. So we are collaboration with MIT for doing that, for the developing non-invasive CGM. I want to say to the international founders who want to operate or move to the US market, don't send someone else over here, because the CEO or representative must be here for their presence.
So being on the ground here is really important to your strategy.
Yeah.
And you're doing clinical trials in the U.S. also, right?
We are about to conduct the feasibility study at Boston Medical Center early next year. Before that, we completed the feasibility study with the non-diabetic people at MIT.
Really fascinating story. And for those listening to the podcast that haven't sort of looked into the K Blockbuster program or looked at what's happening here at the Cambridge Innovation Center, we highly recommend you check it out. Going back to you, Andy, you referenced your colleague June, who Boehringer has BD on the ground in Korea. I mean, how important do you think that is to have the right person on the ground to build those relationships you need in order to do the deals?
It's essential. It's essential both to be there in physical presence, but it becomes even more essential once you actually start the process of interacting with the companies who are based there. I have a team the whole BD team at Boehringer has a global mindset. So if we have a portfolio ambition that we want to bring in external innovation from somewhere, we look globally. And when we find those things, which recently we've been finding a few in Korea and in Asia, having a person that's able to be the conduit. I mean, look, time zones are problematic. Yeah. These are complex discussions early on about the science, about getting the right people in the room. Having a physical presence in the territory so you can coordinate what's the discussion that needs to happen, what is the challenge that you need to answer the question on next. Also trust, like building the relationship that, we're a long way away with my headquarters in Germany and the US, but making them feel that we're really dedicated to working together once we sign a deal, having that local contact that helps build the deal, figure out how it's going to work, and really build trust and a sort of conduit for scientific exchange, right? That's why they're there.
Me again. Can you talk a little bit about whether you see specific strengths in either therapeutic areas or technologies or something that would make Korea a higher up port of call?
I would actually say the breadth that I'm seeing emerge in Korea is why it's becoming a higher protocol. So yes, you're right, oncology's been there for a long time, and we've just signed an oncology deal. I'm increasingly talking to companies in Korea with more of a CRM flavor, which historically...
Cardiorenal metabolic.
Yeah, sorry, cardiorenal metabolic, which is sort of, I wouldn't say emerging anymore. For me, I see a lot of companies now in Korea with that angle. And I know my immunology colleagues as well have a strong basis there. So they're some of our core therapy areas at Boehringer, right? Both for our franchises that exist and for our ambitions for the future. And Korea sort of is increasingly ticking a lot of the boxes of both the expertise, the innovation, and your point again, the willingness to aim high for not just being a next-gen medicine, but really bringing first-in-class transformational therapies. I think that's why Boehringer has a good history there, is it's that risk-sharing willingness to go big and really try and bring something that's going to be transformative rather than incremental.
Yeah, I think we got time for maybe one more question on this first panel. So Aram, maybe I'll turn back to you. You know, any point or any tips for Western life sciences companies, Western investors, in terms of how to build relationships with folks like you know, Korea life sciences entrepreneurs? Like, if you were based here in Boston or based in one of the other, you know, U.S. hubs like San Francisco, like how can they meet folks like you without the obvious one getting on a long flight to Seoul?
Yeah, actually, so I'm the early stage startup CEO. So I'm not the investors or the global BD leader like Andy.
Right.
So in my case, we found the U.S. partner first, MIT. So this is the reverse relationship with, so we first founded U.S. partner.
Yep.
But actually, so I have a tip of the partnering with the Korean startups or life science startup and company. So start with early conversation with some Korean companies that are operating in the U.S. in Boston, because many of Korean startups is here already.
Yeah.
So those startups and company is one of the strongest life science company or startup in Korea.
Because they've been selected for
Yes.
the KHIDI program and sort of vetted on it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so folks listening on the podcast will have to come out to Cambridge here and check out the Venture Café and come visit with folks like you and folks like Andy. You know, we're just out of time on this first panel. Did want to say, you know, Simone is sporting some really great socks here, and we do have a bit of a tradition here at the BioCentury podcast when we are doing it live, where we like to sport our socks. And so I did want to give Andy and Aram some BioCentury podcast socks.
I'll come back again.
Wear them with pride. We really have enjoyed the discussion, so thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break here on the podcast, and we'll be right back momentarily with our next panel, talking with two great investors. So thank you so much.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new co's. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
We are back on this special episode of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Next up is our investor session. So I'd first like to introduce Debra Peattie, Managing Partner of SV Investments US, and Spencer Nam, Managing Partner of KSV Global, both based here in Boston, Cambridge. Debra, let's start with you if we could. I'm going to stick my neck out here and predict that you are not a Korean or Korean American, yet you are working for a Korean investment firm here in the Boston area after a long career in Western biopharma and academia, which means that my question is, why? What has attracted you to this opportunity, and where do you think the opportunities are for SV here in Boston?
Yeah, so in terms of the question about a little bit of background about SV investment, the SV stands for strategic value. And so SV Investment is headquartered in Seoul, which is where it was founded in 2006. Unlike some other investment firms, they span a wide variety of different industries, the biotechnology and healthcare being one of those things. They've expanded well in Southeast Asia. And so it's kind of the reverse of what you were talking about in some ways with Andy, in the sense that they are now looking to expand into the US and establish a footprint here, which is what the Boston office, SVUS, is focused on doing. The other two members of our team are Korean nationals. They've been here many years, but they're Korean. And so I guess I represent the boots on the ground here in the US, largely Boston, Cambridge, where I've been for the past 30 plus years. So I bring the kind of connections and the network here in the Kendall Square, Boston area, which is what they're seeking. And then again, to the point that was raised in the last panel, Seo and Jen, my colleagues, have the ability to go back and forth between here and Seoul. Of course, they're fluent in Korean as well as in English. And so I guess our combination of skills and connections is what attracted the SV headquarters to the idea of having a focused point of entry here.
Great. Really helpful. So Spencer, let's turn to you. You're also based here in Boston. You were previously, I believe, at SV and now at KSV, which is a growth fund investing, I believe, in US, Europe, and Asia. So tell us a little bit about KSV and what your US strategy is and how it relates to Korea.
Sure. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting. So KSV Global, as the name suggests, it's a global platform. We invest across a number of different industries, healthcare being one of them. My background, actually, before I formed KSV about 10 years ago, was a registered analyst on Wall Street, securities analyst covering medtech and diagnostic space. So I did that for about 10 years, coming with a lot of background in that, from the market perspective, how the healthcare companies valued and also invested. So I'm trying to apply that into private companies, and we formed KSV for that. I'm a Korean American, spent about 14 years in Korea, and then my family moved to Boston area when I was a teenager, and have spent about 40 years here. So I have grown with both exposure to Korean culture, as well as obviously spent most of my academic and professional career here in the States. The reason why Korea has been part of KSV's strategy is that we've seen a lot of interest from the Korean government and also Korean companies and investors to come to the United States to establish presence, not only in terms of strategic establishments, but also financial opportunities that would generate above average returns. We're trying to respond to the market demand that Korea has for the US healthcare industry, US healthcare market, and we are trying to create a bridge between Korean companies and US investors and US capital. So my role really is identifying interesting companies that has a potential to be significant investment opportunities for US investors as well as Korean investors, many of whom we partner with.
Thank you for that, Spencer. Debra, there's obviously a lot of famous biotech venture funds here in Boston, Cambridge. Quite a few biotechs, obviously, probably the largest biotech hub. A lot of U.S. biotechs with, I'd imagine, opportunities potentially to get in front of those U.S. VCs. So walk us through a little bit. If I'm a U.S. biotech CEO, like what are the advantages, perhaps, of looking to a firm like SV or a Korea investor when I'm looking to raise my next round? Why should I talk to someone like you for a syndicate? Are there strategic reasons to bring in a Korea investor like SV?
Yes, there are. So SV, the average size of the funds under SV management, and they've got about 1.5 billion under management, is roughly 100 million or a little less. So in the spectrum of venture capital funds, that's a relatively small size fund. So that means that we look to join syndicates as opposed to being a lead investor defining the term sheet. A key thing that we fold into our strategy is recognizing that we're not going to be the lead, is what value can we bring to the table, in this case for small early stage biotechs in Boston, Cambridge, that might be compelling for someone looking for funding. And a key thing to consider is, say, the ability to conduct clinical trials, because even early stage companies, you should really start from the very beginning. Think about who's going to be manufacturing your material, because as statistics show, since most things do not successfully get to drug approval, your clinical trials are going to be really where the CMC grade, molecules, whether they're biologics or small molecules or cells, are going to be used. So you need to think from the very beginning about who's going to be making it, how much that's going to cost, and about the trials as well. And so South Korea has, excellent skills and abilities in both of those fields, the CDMOs and the clinical trial network there.
Yeah, let me jump in because I was wondering what you were going to say, because this was going to be my question actually. We've really seen this become a critical issue now. I can tell you, I was just talking with somebody, I went out to Korea the first time, I think it's 10 years ago now, and back then they were saying, we're a center for clinical trials.
Yep.
Obviously Australia's been doing that. I'm not sure how much it's on people's radar. We now see people waking up to the idea that in China, of course, they are generating early clinical data very, very fast, and that's compelling data that is driving deal flow.
Yep.
Whether people in the West are like, well, we can do it, or, it is, and it's driving deal flow. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, are there specific areas within clinical trials where Korea offers an advantage? Can you get into the clinic faster? What is the value proposition for doing it, doing your early clinical trials in Korea?
Yeah, and you're right. I think this is not on a lot of radar screens. So I think one of the key things is, so Seoul is, a very highly populated city with a large number, I think it's about 8 to 10, top tier medical schools, hospitals. So it's a high concentration of potential subjects / patients for trials in an area where there are a lot of hospital beds. So for example, if you look at the total hospital beds, which are a surrogate for the ability to do a clinical trial, in Seoul, as of now, there are about 90,000, so 90,000. In Boston, Cambridge, there are 4,000 beds. So the number of hospital beds in Seoul is 10% of the whole number of hospital beds in the United States. And there are 10 million people in Seoul. So like Boston and Greater Boston, if you do Seoul and Greater Seoul, Greater Seoul, there are 20 million people, which is approximately, half of the population's 50 million in Korea.
I know we want to bring Spencer in, but let me just ask you one follow-up. So definitely, and I broke this down, and we had an article which, I don't know, do we have show notes, Josh? We could put it in the show notes. Yep. Breaking down between China and the US. Definitely the bigger part is patient recruitment.
Yep.
But there are also parts of the regulatory process, and obviously in Australia, well, not obviously, but for those, in Australia, that is smoother and easier. What does that look like in Korea? Is there less red tape? Like, what is the process?
From my perspective, anyway, what Korea has going for it is it's got a nationalized health system that covers 97% of the population, single payer system, and it's totally, all the data are collected, it's all in one place, so their ability to mobilize data quickly, and the fact that, since again it's a nationalized system, you go to the hospital there even when you're well. So the hospitals have healthy people, they have unhealthy people, and so that's just where you go for your health care. So I think in terms of red tape, I wouldn't say it's less red tape, I'd say it's so well organized, and everyone is under a single system, it's not fragmented. And that leads to the ability of rapid recruitment, aside from the government involvement in utilizing their clinical trial infrastructure for the good of the company. And there were surveys done there asking people on the street, do you know what clinical trials are? Would you be willing to participate? What are the drivers? So it's something that they very proactively encourage because they recognize their skill set. Real quickly, the statistics currently are that a trial in Korea can be done 40% faster and 40% less cost than in the US.
Right, so the UK needs to be listening to this podcast because this is exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's go on, Josh.
Yeah, great discussion. So Spencer, let's flip it if we could. Simone just mentioned, trip 10 years ago, but we've also been out several times over the last year, us as well as some colleagues, been seeing some really interesting early stage biotechs out there that frankly, I think with the exception maybe of Andy, who was on the earlier panel, are not necessarily on the radar of a lot of Western biopharma execs or Western investors. So if you were a Korea biotech, a founder, like how do you prepare for globalization? How do you find the right global investors, the right global partners? I predict we're going to have a lot of folks listening to the podcast from Korea. What are some guidance you can provide, with your experience here in Boston?
Sure, and I'll preface this comment by saying that I'm an investor investing someone else's capital to generate return.
Kind of capital,
But I have to, obviously I have essentially a boss in the limited partners that I have to respond to, and they can't wait 20 years to deliver returns for them. I will be out of business. So it's a much less time frame through which we have to make something work, as in, we have to exit. From that standpoint, Korea can be a bit of a challenge, especially in healthcare biotech space, where a lot of these assets are still in a much earlier stage than some of the assets that you come across here in the United States. I think one of the challenges that we have faced up until now is that a lot of the researches that were being done, projects that were being done in Korea, were less known by U.S. mainstream, the companies and also institutions here, including the investors. So because the Korea is on the other side of the globe relative to the United States, the different culture and the language, just there's a fundamental sort of roadblock that you have to overcome, and that is just how do we get ourselves known to the U.S. market. Now, fortunately, from Korea's standpoint, we have these the mega companies from U.S. and Europe now going into Korea, opening up offices, and really canvassing the country to find these good deals. But still, there's a bit of a gap between what we know here with information that we have versus what's available over there. So if you are an exciting Korean company in biotech space or healthcare space that you want to access global market, I think you have to come to the United States. And when I talk to a lot of Korean entrepreneurs, their sort of idea of coming to the United States is like, you got to land the ship almost, right? Yeah. But it's not like that. You actually just think of it as like you are flying over United States, 10,000 feet on a plane, and you're jumping with a parachute. And you're landing by yourself in Boston, Massachusetts, or San Francisco area, and you're all alone. But that starts the whole process of you becoming part of the network and be able to associate yourself with all these established entrepreneurs, the big farmers, the investors, and so forth. And it's just really I think the recursion of meeting the folks in the U.S. and be able to introduce you your story, and that creates a momentum that leads to more investments and potential collaborations with big farmers and so forth. So it's just a matter of face time, and I really think that that's very critical. Even if you're not comfortable with English, you just got to come here first, and then it will happen, because Korea's got a ton of great research and a ton of great scientists working on some very interesting stuff, but they're just not being publicized enough.
I saw some stat recently about how the delegation from Korea at Bio this year, which was in Boston, was the largest international delegation of any country. But it sounds like what you're saying is you need to go to these events, you need to go to Bio, you need to go to JP Morgan, but it sounds like you need to do more than that also.
Well, yes, you do, because so the one thing that this is culturally, you can't appreciate until you're part of the Korean sort of the culture is there is actually a national effort to turn biotech space, the healthcare space, as one of their long-term growth opportunities as a country. So the Korean government is spending amazing amount of money trying to support all these companies, Korean fledgling companies, big farmers, anybody to really come to the U.S. and build their presence here. But just coming to these conferences is not exactly how you're going to develop relationships. What you need to do is really, just like Apollon and others that have come to United States through K Blockbuster program, for example, you got to be here and be part of this ecosystem. And go ahead.
I want to go back to something that Andy said on the earlier panel from Boehringer, which is that when they walk in to conversations with Korean innovators, really they start off, they're very, very thorough, they're very rigorous, they walk in knowing what they want, which to me speaks to a sort of certain level of sophistication. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a sophistication on the sort of the U.S. market side, and there's a sophistication, grades of sophistication on the Korea side. So Boehringer Ingelheim, extremely sophisticated buyer. They can look at a particular project or particular scientist, and they can actually evaluate them in a very sophisticated and very detailed way. How do we fit this particular project into our system? We as investors are much less equipped for something like that. So we are relying on sort of outside signals for them to tell us, for us to recognize, oh, this is a great opportunity. And so if the Korean companies are trying to license out some of their assets to U.S. companies or global companies, then you got to somehow bring them over to Korea, or you got to come to the United States and meet them here and have these discussions going back and forth. It's not going to be like one and done. It's got to be multiple discussions that you will have to go through, right? So there is that challenge that you have to overcome. But if you are looking for investments, then clearly Korean government and Korean investors are investing a lot of capital into Korean companies. But for you to really get to the next level of development, you need a bigger capital out of the U.S., in my opinion. And in order to do so, you can't just address the sophistication that Boehringer Ingelheim or Pfizer or Novo Nordisk is looking for. You got to talk to us, the investors. We're not as sophisticated as these pharma companies, but we got to be comfortable betting on you, because this is a lot of risk that we are taking. And by the way, if you are here in Boston, for example, where I'm operating, it's much easier for us to feel comfortable with your story than if you are in Seoul, Korea, and we have to do a Zoom, and gosh, I have no idea what happens on a day-to-day basis. It's a challenge.
Let's get Debra's view on it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because again, for us, we're in the Boston office of SV, we are looking here. So what we tried to do is, of course, find, top-tier science, but then ensure that aligns with the interests of, our colleagues over in Seoul in terms of the bio team. So it's, I would say, to Spencer's point, it is more straightforward here to assess, say, the interest of big pharma and even other biotechs, because they're all here in an emerging technology. And then kind of one of the challenges that our team has is to align that with, the interests of the home office.
Yeah. So and let me add to that, and as an investor in the United States, I can tell you right now, the researchers or even pharma companies, they may not feel pressure or the concerns associated with CFIUS reviews. We are feeling that actually quite literally. Every deal that we do, if it's particularly if the deal is in Asia, for example, we have to make sure that it does not trigger CFIUS. So what that means is actually Korea is one of the few places in the world where we can actually identify attractive healthcare companies that will not trigger that. Unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons, China, even though there's a lot of data coming out and all of that, it's a concern for us. We don't have a location in Shanghai that we can leverage to invest in these companies. We investors in the United States, almost everybody, I can tell you this right now, is going to have trouble investing in an asset in China, which makes the big farmers, global big farmers, a huge advantage, advantageous position for them to go in and pick these assets up. But for us, we really got to, if you're going to invest outside of the United States, it probably Korea is one of the few places that we can we can find attractive early stage companies.
Yeah, that's great, guys. I mean, we could go on, I think, all night. I mean, I'd love to continue the discussion, but we are running out of time. So first off, wanted to thank Spencer and Debra with two pair each of BioCentury This Week podcast socks. And really wanted to thank KHIDI and Venture Café Cambridge for hosting the BioCentury This Week podcast. Thank all of you for joining. Really thank our guests, and wanted to also do a quick plug. BioCentury's podcast will be back on the road later this month, November 19th in the UK, on the sidelines of London Life Sciences Week and Jefferies Week. You can find out more about that at biocenturylondon.com. And if you have enjoyed today's discussion about Korea opportunities, we hope you'll join us March 9th to 11th in Seoul, where BioCentury's 5th East-West Biopharma Summit will take place. You can learn more about that at biocenturyeastwest.com. And for everyone here in the audience, we're going to have a great group of companies presenting that are part of the KHIDI Blockbuster program. So stick around for that. And thank you all for joining, and we hope to continue the discussion on the next podcast. So thank you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Where the socks?
I will.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
BioCentury would like to thank the Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare and KHIDI for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about the K-Blockbuster companies, visit kblockbuster.com/directory.